"This plane isn't for people like you," shouted the woman at the man in the cleaning uniform. She wrinkled her nose in disgust at the mop bucket Marcus held. "Call security! What is this man doing in first class?" Nobody noticed, Marcus quietly smiling. Marcus Chen stood in the middle of the first-class cabin. He was a man in his 50s, medium height, with a modest appearance. The dark blue cleaning uniform he wore was washed, but looked old. He held a plastic mop bucket in his hand, with a small cleaning bag slung over his shoulder. Nothing distinguished him from other airport workers. Nothing, except the boarding pass in his pocket for seat 1A. "Ma'am, please stay calm," said Sarah, the young flight attendant, her hands trembling. 26-year-old Sarah had only been in this job for 2 years and had never encountered such a situation. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong section. Economy class is this way." Marcus quietly pulled out his boarding pass. The card inside the plastic protector was pristine. It clearly read, "Seat 1A, first class." "This must be fake," said the arrogant woman, Victoria Sterling. In her 40s, she wore expensive designer clothes and jewelry that screamed wealth. Her perfectly manicured nails pointed accusingly at Marcus. "Look at him! Does he look like someone who can afford first class?" Other passengers began to take notice. A businessman in a tailored suit looked up from his laptop, his expression showing disgust. An elderly couple whispered to each other, shaking their heads. A young professional woman pulled her purse closer, as if Marcus might contaminate it. "Sir, could you please show me your identification?" Sarah asked nervously. She was caught between protocol and the mounting pressure from the first-class passengers.
Marcus reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a simple ID card. No gold cards, no platinum status markers, just a basic driver's license with his photo. "Marcus Chen," Sarah read aloud. The name on the boarding pass matched perfectly. Victoria Sterling leaned forward, her voice rising. "I don't care what his name is. He's obviously confused or lying. Flight attendant, I demand you remove him immediately. I paid good money for this seat, and I won't sit next to... She gestured dismissively at Marcus's uniform. "To what, ma'am?" Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice calm and steady. There was something in his tone that made Sarah pause, something that suggested depths beneath the surface. "To someone who doesn't belong here," Victoria finished, her chin raised defiantly. Marcus nodded slowly, as if he'd heard this before. "And how exactly does someone belong in first class, Mrs. Sterling, Victoria Sterling? And if you must know, people who belong here are people who work hard, who contribute to society, who can actually afford these seats without stealing boarding passes or lying their way on board." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. The businessman nodded approvingly. The elderly couple seemed satisfied with Victoria's explanation. Even Sarah seemed to be swaying toward their perspective. Marcus set his mop bucket down carefully and looked around the cabin. His eyes took in each face, noting expressions, cataloging reactions. Some showed disgust, others curiosity, but most showed the automatic assumption that he didn't belong. "I see," Marcus said quietly. "So it's about what a person looks like, what they wear, how they present themselves." "Exactly!" Victoria exclaimed, pleased that he finally understood. "First class is for first-class people. It's about standards, about maintaining a certain level of quality."
Sarah was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the confrontation. She glanced toward the cockpit, wondering if she should call the captain. The boarding process had stopped, and passengers in economy were craning their necks to see what was happening. "Ma'am," Sarah said to Victoria, "perhaps we should just verify his ticket with the system." "Don't bother," Victoria snapped. Can't you see this is obviously some kind of mistake or scam? Just move him to where he belongs." Marcus picked up his mop bucket again. "And where exactly do I belong?" "In the back of the plane," Victoria said without hesitation. "Or better yet, off the plane entirely. You're making everyone uncomfortable." She wasn't wrong. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers were shifting in their seats, some reaching for their phones to record what they assumed would be the removal of an interloper. A man in his 30s, wearing khaki pants and a polo shirt, leaned across the aisle. "Look, buddy, just go quietly, okay? Don't make this harder than it has to be." Marcus turned to him. "And you are?" "James Morrison. I'm a regional manager for a consulting firm. I fly first class every week for business. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." "I see. And your qualifications for making that determination?" James bristled. "My qualifications? I work 60 hours a week, I generate millions in revenue for my company, and I can afford this seat. What are your qualifications for being here?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Around him, the first-class cabin had become a theater of judgment, with him as the unwelcome performer. "My qualifications," Marcus said slowly, "might surprise you." "I doubt that," Victoria interjected. "Sarah, please call security. This has gone on long enough." Sarah was conflicted. The boarding pass was legitimate, the ID matched, but the social pressure was overwhelming. Every instinct told her to side with the paying customers who clearly belonged in first class. "Sir," Sarah said to Marcus, "perhaps there's been a mistake with your booking. Maybe I could help you find a seat in economy? I'm sure we can work something out." Marcus studied her face. Sarah was young, probably struggling to pay off student loans, working in a service job where she had to smile and accommodate demanding passengers every day. She wasn't malicious, just scared of making the wrong choice. "No mistake," Marcus said gently, "but I appreciate your attempt to find a peaceful solution." "Then you admit you don't belong here," Victoria said triumphantly. "Security! Where is security?" A large man in a uniform appeared at the front of the cabin. Tom Bradley was the air marshal for this flight, a former military man with 20 years of experience dealing with difficult passengers. "What seems to be the problem here?" Tom asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Victoria immediately launched into her complaint. "This man is trying to sit in first class, but clearly he doesn't belong. He's some kind of janitor or maintenance worker, and he won't leave when we ask him to." Tom looked at Marcus, taking in the uniform, the cleaning supplies, the general appearance. His experience told him this was probably a confused employee who had wandered into the wrong section.
"Sir, can I see your boarding pass and ID?" Marcus handed them over without argument. Tom examined them carefully, comparing the photo to Marcus's face, checking the seat number against the ticket. "These appear to be legitimate," Tom said slowly. "Appear to be," Victoria seized on the words. "That means they could be fake. Can't you tell?" Tom was more thorough than Sarah had been. He pulled out his phone and called the gate agent. After a brief conversation, he hung up and looked at Marcus with new interest. "The ticket was purchased yesterday evening," Tom said. "Paid for in full, no red flags in the system." The cabin fell silent. This wasn't the answer they'd expected. Victoria's face reddened. "That's impossible. Look at him. Does he look like someone who can afford a first-class ticket?" "Ma'am," Tom said carefully, "appearance isn't grounds for removing a passenger with valid documentation." "But he's a janitor," Victoria sputtered. Marcus spoke up. "Is there a rule against janitors flying first class?" The question hung in the air. Legally, there wasn't. Morally, Victoria clearly believed there should be. James Morrison jumped in. Come on, be realistic. How does a janitor afford a ticket that costs $3,000? The same way anyone else does, by paying for it. With what money? Janitors make minimum wage. You probably make more in tips than he makes in a month, she said to Sarah. Sarah flushed, uncomfortable with being dragged into the argument. Marcus set his cleaning supplies down and looked directly at Victoria. You seem very interested in my financial situation. Because it's obvious you can't afford to be here. This is fraud or theft or something illegal. Mrs. Sterling, Marcus said, his voice still calm. What if I told you that last month alone, I donated more money to charity than most people make in a lifetime? Victoria laughed harshly. I'd say you're delusional. Janitors don't donate millions to charity. Millions? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Who said anything about millions? The slip caught everyone's attention. Victoria had inadvertently revealed the scale of wealth she was thinking about, the kind of money that would make someone's charitable donations newsworthy. I was exaggerating, Victoria backtracked. The point is, you clearly don't have that kind of money. Marcus nodded slowly. You're very confident about what I can and cannot afford. Tom was still holding Marcus's documents, but his demeanor had shifted. Something about the man's calm confidence, his lack of defensiveness, was making him reconsider his initial assessment. Sir, just to be completely clear, you purchased this ticket yourself?
I did. And you have a right to sit in the seat you paid for? I believe so, yes. Tom turned to Victoria. Ma'am, unless there's a security concern or disruption to the flight, I can't remove a passenger with valid documentation. Victoria's face was turning an alarming shade of red. This is ridiculous! Look at him! He's carrying a mop! He smells like cleaning chemicals! Marcus glanced down at his supplies, then back at Victoria. I was working before the flight. Is that grounds for discrimination? It's not discrimination, Victoria protested. It's standards. It's maintaining the dignity of first class. Whose dignity? Marcus asked quietly. The question was simple, but it cut through all of Victoria's arguments. Whose dignity was really at stake here? Marcus wasn't being disruptive, wasn't bothering anyone, wasn't doing anything except existing in a space where his appearance made others uncomfortable. Sarah was watching the exchange with growing fascination. There was something about Marcus that didn't fit. Despite his humble appearance, he spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. His questions were precise, his responses measured. Sir, Sarah said hesitantly, may I ask what kind of work you do? Marcus smiled at her, the first genuine smile he'd shown since boarding. I clean things up. See, Victoria said, he admits it! He's a janitor! But Sarah was still looking at Marcus, and she noticed that his answer was carefully worded. He cleaned things up, but that didn't necessarily mean he was a janitor. What kind of things? Marcus's smile grew wider. Usually messes that other people make. Before Victoria could launch into another tirade, a commotion at the front of the cabin interrupted them. A man in an expensive suit was boarding, flanked by two assistants. He moved with the confidence of someone expecting deference wherever he went. What's the delay? The man demanded. I have a meeting in London that cannot be postponed. Sarah hurried forward. Mr. Richardson, welcome aboard. There's just a small situation we're resolving. Richard Richardson was a name everyone in first class recognized. He was a prominent business leader, frequently featured in financial magazines, known for his aggressive acquisition strategies and his blunt speaking style. Richardson's eyes swept the cabin and immediately locked on to Marcus. What is maintenance doing in first class? That's what we're trying to figure out. Victoria said, eagerly, clearly hoping that Richardson's obvious wealth and status would add weight to her position. Richardson strode over, his assistants trailing behind him. He looked Marcus up and down with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating people's worth at a glance. "You," Richardson pointed at Marcus, "explain yourself. What are you doing in my cabin?"
Marcus looked up at Richardson calmly. "Your cabin. You know what I mean. This section is for business passengers, people with important work to do, not for—" Richardson gestured dismissively at Marcus's uniform. "Not for people who work with their hands?" Marcus suggested. "Exactly. Nothing personal, but there are protocols, standards. Surely you understand." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I do understand. You believe that a person's value is determined by their appearance, their job title, their perceived social status." "I believe in order," Richardson said firmly. "Everyone has their place. This isn't yours." "And you've determined this how?" Richardson's patience was wearing thin. "Look, I don't have time for philosophy. You're obviously confused about where you belong. Take your mop bucket and find a seat in economy." "And if I refuse?" "Then security will remove you, and you'll likely face charges for trespassing or fraud." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from Richardson to Victoria to James to the other passengers who were watching with obvious agreement. Finally, his gaze settled on Sarah, who was looking increasingly troubled by the whole situation. "Miss Sarah," Marcus said, "what do you think? Should I move to economy?" Sarah was caught completely off guard by the direct question. All eyes in the cabin turned to her, waiting for her answer. The pressure was enormous. Side with the obviously wealthy and influential passengers, or defend the janitor whose story didn't quite add up? I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "Your ticket is valid, but everyone seems so upset." "And why do you think they're upset?" Marcus asked gently. Sarah looked around the cabin, at the faces watching her, waiting for her to make the choice that would restore their comfortable assumptions about who belonged where. "Because," she said slowly, "you don't look like what they expect a first-class passenger to look like." It was an honest answer, and it hung in the air like an accusation. Richardson stepped forward. "This is ridiculous. I'm calling the captain." "No need," came a voice from the front of the cabin. Captain Williams had emerged from the cockpit, drawn by the commotion that was delaying his flight. Captain Williams was a veteran pilot with 30 years of experience. He'd seen every kind of passenger drama imaginable, and his approach was always the same: facts over feelings, safety over comfort, law over opinion. "What's the problem here?" Captain Williams asked. Richardson immediately took charge. "Captain, there's been some kind of mix-up with seating. This maintenance worker has a ticket for first class, but obviously there's been an error." Captain Williams looked at Marcus, taking in the uniform and cleaning supplies. "Sir, are you a passenger on this flight?" "I am." "Do you have valid documentation?" Marcus handed over his boarding pass and ID. Captain Williams examined them with the thoroughness of someone who understood that airline regulations were not suggestions. "Mr. Chen," the captain said, reading the name on the ID, "this ticket was purchased yesterday for this flight, seat 1A. Is this correct?" "Yes, Captain." "Did you purchase this ticket yourself?" "I did." Captain Williams turned to Tom Bradley. "Any security concerns?" "No, sir. Documents check out, no disruptive behavior, no apparent threat." The captain nodded and looked around the cabin at the faces watching him. These were people accustomed to getting their way, people who expected their complaints to be taken seriously. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Williams said in his clear, authoritative voice, "Mr. Chen has valid documentation for seat 1A. Unless there is a specific safety or security concern, he has the right to occupy the seat he purchased."
"The only mistake," Captain Williams said, "would be removing a passenger with valid documentation because other passengers disapprove of his appearance." Richardson tried a different approach. "Captain, Surely you can understand our concern. This is highly unusual. Unusual, perhaps. Illegal? No. The captain's tone made it clear that the discussion was over. Mr. Chen, please take your seat. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be departing shortly. Captain Williams returned to the cockpit, leaving behind a cabin full of frustrated first-class passengers and one quietly smiling janitor. Marcus moved to seat 1A and began stowing his cleaning supplies in the overhead compartment. The simple action seemed to emphasize the absurdity of the situation to the other passengers. Victoria slumped into her seat, muttering under her breath. Richardson was on his phone, probably complaining to someone about the state of air travel. James Morrison stared out the window, clearly disgusted with the whole situation. Sarah was still standing in the aisle, watching Marcus settle into his seat. There was something about the way he moved, the quiet confidence, the complete lack of embarrassment or defensiveness, that continued to puzzle her. "Is there anything I can get you before takeoff, Mr. Chen?" she asked. Marcus looked up at her and smiled. "Just some water, please." "And Sarah?" "Yes?" "Thank you for asking the right questions." Sarah wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but something in his tone made her feel like she'd passed some kind of test she didn't know she was taking. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the first-class cabin settled into an uncomfortable quiet. The other passengers avoided looking at Marcus, but he could feel their attention, their continued disbelief, their resentment at having their comfortable assumptions challenged. Marcus opened the small bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a book. Not a magazine, not a phone, but an actual hardcover book. Several passengers noticed, though they pretended not to. Victoria couldn't help herself. "What are you reading?" she asked, her tone suggesting that janitors probably didn't read anything more sophisticated than instruction manuals. Marcus held up the book so she could see the cover. It was a biography of Andrew Carnegie, the steel magnate who had famously given away most of his fortune. "Interesting choice," Richardson said from across the aisle, his tone dripping with condescension. "Dreaming about being a robber baron?" Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. "Actually, I'm more interested in the part where he gave it all away." "Right," Richardson smirked. "Easy to give away money you don't have." Marcus returned to his book without responding, but Sarah noticed that he'd bookmarked a chapter titled The Gospel of Wealth, Carnegie's famous essay about the moral obligation of the wealthy to use their fortunes for the betterment of society. As the plane took off and reached cruising altitude, the tension in the cabin gradually began to ease. The other passengers tried to settle into their normal routines, but the presence of Marcus in seat 1A continued to be a source of fascination and frustration. Richardson was working on his laptop, occasionally glancing at Marcus with obvious irritation. Victoria had pulled out her tablet and was scrolling through social media, probably looking for something to distract her from the affront to her sensibilities. James Morrison had his earbuds in, but Sarah noticed he kept looking in Marcus's direction.
Marcus, for his part, seemed completely at peace. He read his book, accepted refreshments politely, and made no attempt to engage with the other passengers, unless spoken to directly. If he was bothered by their obvious disapproval, he didn't show it. About an hour into the flight, Sarah approached Marcus with a question that had been nagging at her. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "can I ask you something?" Marcus looked up from his book. "Of course." "You don't seem... you're not what I expected." Marcus smiled. "What did you expect?" Sarah struggled to put her thoughts into words. "I guess I expected someone who would be more defensive or angry or trying to prove something. But you seem so calm." "Why would I be angry?" "Because of how everyone treated you, the assumptions they made." Marcus considered this. People make assumptions based on limited information. It's natural. The question is what they do when they get more information. Sarah glanced around the cabin. "I don't think anyone's changed their minds." "Haven't they?" Marcus asked. "Look closer." Sarah looked around and realized he was right. The dynamics had shifted subtly. Richardson was still working, but his glances at Marcus had become less hostile and more curious. Victoria had stopped muttering and was reading something intently on her tablet. James had removed his earbuds and was listening to the conversation. "They're starting to wonder," Marcus said quietly. "Which is the first step?" "The first step to what?" Before Marcus could answer, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. It wasn't severe, but it was enough to make everyone grab their armrests and look around nervously. Sarah was thrown off balance and stumbled slightly. Marcus immediately steadied her with a gentle but firm grip. "Thank you," Sarah said, and then noticed something that made her eyes widen. When Marcus had reached out to help her, his sleeve had pulled back, revealing a watch on his wrist. It wasn't a cleaning worker's watch. The watch was elegant, understated, but clearly expensive. More than that, it looked custom-made with an inscription on the back that Sarah couldn't quite read. Marcus noticed her staring and smoothly pulled his sleeve back down, but it was too late. Sarah had seen it, and the sight had completely upended her understanding of the situation. A janitor who read biographies of industrialists, who spoke with quiet authority, who wore custom-made watches, and who seemed completely unfazed by the hostility of first-class passengers. Sarah was beginning to realize that Marcus Chen might not be who everyone assumed he was, and she was starting to wonder if the joke was on them. Sarah couldn't shake the image of that watch from her mind. As she moved through the cabin serving drinks and snacks, she kept glancing back at Marcus, trying to reconcile what she'd seen with what everyone assumed about him.
The turbulence had passed, but it had left behind something more unsettling than physical discomfort. It had cracked open a door of possibility that Sarah wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. When she reached Marcus with the drink cart, she found him still reading his Carnegie biography, completely absorbed in the text. He looked up as she approached, and she noticed again that quality she couldn't quite name, the way he looked at people, as if he was seeing more than they realized they were showing. "Another water, Mr. Chen?" she asked. "Please, and perhaps you could tell me about yourself, Sarah. How long have you been flying?" The question caught her off guard. Passengers rarely showed genuine interest in the flight crew as people, rather than service providers. 2 years, she said, pouring his water. "I'm saving up for nursing school." "Noble profession," Marcus said. "What draws you to healthcare?" Sarah found herself responding to his genuine interest. "I want to help people. Sometimes I think about how different things might be if people just took a moment to really see each other, you know?" Marcus smiled. "I know exactly what you mean." Before Sarah could respond, Richardson's voice cut across the cabin. "Miss, could you do something about the temperature? It's freezing in here." Sarah hurried over to Richardson's seat. "I'll check on that right away, sir." As she adjusted the individual air controls above his seat, Richardson continued his complaints. "This whole flight has been a disaster. First the delay with the seating confusion, now this. I have extremely important meetings in London. Do you understand what that means?" "Yes, sir, I understand you have important commitments." Richardson looked at her as if she'd missed the point entirely. "Important commitments? I'm negotiating a merger that will affect thousands of jobs. The people depending on me to succeed could lose everything if I'm not at my best." "That does sound very stressful," Sarah said diplomatically. "Stressful?" Richardson laughed harshly. "Try carrying the weight of that responsibility. Try knowing that your decisions affect entire communities. Most people have no idea what real pressure feels like." From his seat, Marcus looked up from his book. "What kind of merger?" he asked. Richardson turned, apparently surprised that the janitor was listening to his conversation. "Excuse me?" "The merger you mentioned. What industry?"
Richardson's expression suggested he found the question presumptuous. "I don't think that's any of your concern." "Just curious," Marcus said mildly. "I find business fascinating." "Do you?" Richardson's tone was condescending. "And what would a maintenance worker know about high-level business negotiations?" Marcus closed his book, keeping his finger in place to mark his page. "Probably not much, but I've always wondered, when you're negotiating deals that affect thousands of jobs, how do you balance profit margins with human impact?" The question was so precisely articulated, so directly focused on the ethical dimensions of business, that it stopped Richardson short. That's a complex issue," Richardson said, clearly not expecting such a sophisticated question.
"I imagine it is," Marcus said. "Andrew Carnegie wrote extensively about the moral responsibilities that come with business success. Have you read his work?" Richardson stared at Marcus, his assumptions grinding against this new information. Janitors didn't typically quote Andrew Carnegie or ask pointed questions about business ethics. "Some of it," Richardson admitted grudgingly. "What did you think of his argument that great wealth is a trust to be administered for the benefit of society?" Richardson was now completely off balance. This wasn't a conversation he'd expected to have with a man in a janitor's uniform. It's an interesting perspective," Richardson said carefully. Victoria Sterling had been listening to this exchange with growing bewilderment. "How does a janitor know about Andrew Carnegie?" she asked bluntly. Marcus turned to her with that same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the flight. "The same way anyone knows about anything, Mrs. Sterling, by being curious and taking the time to learn." "But surely you have more practical concerns," Victoria said. "I mean, people in your position usually worry about immediate things, bills, job security, basic needs." "What makes you think I don't?" Marcus asked. "Well, you're sitting here discussing philosophy and business theory instead of, I don't know, watching movies or playing games on your phone." Marcus considered this. "And what does that tell you?" Victoria struggled with the question. What it told her was that her assumptions about Marcus were increasingly difficult to maintain, but admitting that would require acknowledging that her worldview might be flawed. It's an interesting perspective," she said finally. "Unusual how?" "Most people in service jobs don't—" She paused, realizing she was about to say something that would reveal her own prejudices even more clearly. "Don't what?" Marcus prompted gently. "Don't talk like you do? Don't read the books you read? Don't ask the questions you ask?" "And why do you think that is?" Victoria was trapped by her own logic. Either she had to admit that she believed people in service jobs were inherently less intelligent or curious, or she had to consider that her assumptions about Marcus might be wrong. I don't know," she said, and for the first time since boarding, she sounded uncertain rather than arrogant. James Morrison, who had been listening to this conversation while pretending to work, finally spoke up. "Look, we're all curious about you," he said to Marcus. "You're not what anyone expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more, I don't know, deferential, apologetic. Most people in your situation would be intimidated by first class, by being around successful business people." "What makes you think I'm intimidated?" "You're not acting like it," James admitted, "which is what's confusing everyone." Marcus set his book aside and looked around the cabin. "May I ask you all something?" The question was addressed to everyone, and despite themselves, they all leaned in slightly to listen. "What do you think success looks like?" Marcus asked. Richardson answered first. "Wealth, achievement, recognition, the ability to influence outcomes and shape industries. Power," Victoria added, "social status, being able to afford the things you want and go where you want to go." James nodded. "Career advancement, respect from peers, financial security for your family." Marcus listened to each response, nodding thoughtfully.
Then he turned to Sarah, who had been standing quietly nearby, still processing everything she'd heard. "What about you, Sarah? What do you think success looks like?" Sarah was startled by the question. "Me? I don't know. I guess I think success is being able to help people, making a difference in someone's life, being the kind of person your family can be proud of." "Interesting," Marcus said. "So we have success defined as wealth and power, and success defined as service and impact. Those aren't necessarily the same thing, are they?" "Of course they are," Richardson said. "The more successful you become, the more you can help others. Wealth creates opportunity for philanthropy." "Does it?" Marcus asked. "Or does the pursuit of wealth sometimes conflict with helping others?" Richardson bristled. "Are you suggesting that successful people don't care about others?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm asking questions." Victoria jumped in. "It's easy to criticize from the outside. When you're responsible for major decisions, when you have employees and shareholders depending on you, idealism becomes a luxury you can't afford." "So you see idealism and success as incompatible?" "In the real world, often yes." "The real world," Marcus repeated thoughtfully. "Tell me about your real world, Mrs. Sterling." Victoria straightened in her seat, clearly on more comfortable ground. "I run a consulting firm that specializes in corporate efficiency. I help companies streamline their operations, eliminate waste, maximize profitability. I've saved my clients millions of dollars and helped them become more competitive in the global marketplace." "Impressive," Marcus said. "And when you eliminate waste and maximize profitability, what happens to the people whose jobs are eliminated?" "That's not my responsibility," Victoria's expression hardened. "My responsibility is to my clients, to help them succeed in a competitive environment. If that means some positions become redundant, that's unfortunate, but it's business." "Just business," Marcus said quietly. "Exactly. Emotions and sentiment don't pay bills or create sustainable companies." Marcus was quiet for a moment, and Sarah noticed that his expression had become more serious, though still not hostile. "Mrs. Sterling," Marcus said finally, "what would you do if you discovered that your advice had led to the closure of a factory that was the primary employer in a small town?" "I'd feel bad for the people affected, but I'd also know that I'd done my job professionally and ethically. Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for the greater good." "The greater good for whom?" "For the economy as a whole. For consumers who benefit from more efficient companies. For shareholders who see better returns on their investments. But not for the families who lose their livelihoods." Victoria was becoming defensive. "You can't save everyone. That's naive thinking." "Is it?" Marcus asked. "Or is it possible that the way we define success might need to change?" Richardson had been listening to this exchange with growing irritation. Easy words from someone who's never had to make real decisions or bear real responsibility. You can afford to be idealistic because you don't have skin in the game. Marcus looked at Richardson for a long moment. "What makes you think I don't have skin in the game?" "Look around," Richardson gestured at the first-class cabin. "Look at yourself. You're a janitor flying first class, probably using frequent flyer miles or some kind of upgrade. You're talking about business ethics and social responsibility, but you've never had to make payroll or answer to a board of directors or navigate complex regulatory environments." "Haven't I?" Marcus asked quietly.
"What do you mean?" Sarah asked. Marcus picked up his book and opened it to a page he'd marked earlier. Andrew Carnegie started as a poor Scottish immigrant. He worked as a bobbin boy in a cotton factory, making $1.20 a week. People would have looked at him the way you've all looked at me today. "That was different," Victoria said. "That was over a century ago. The world has changed." "Has it?" Marcus asked. Have the fundamental questions about how we treat each other changed? Have the moral challenges of success and responsibility changed? Richardson was growing impatient. This is all very philosophical, but what's your point? Marcus closed the book and looked directly at Richardson. My point is that you've all made assumptions about who I am and what I'm capable of based on how I look and how I'm dressed. You've dismissed my questions and opinions because you believe my appearance tells you everything you need to know about my intelligence, my experience, and my worth as a person. The cabin fell silent. The accusation was direct and uncomfortable, but it was also undeniably accurate. But the thing is, Marcus continued, every single one of you has revealed more about yourselves in this conversation than you've learned about me. Sarah realized he was right. In their eagerness to categorize and dismiss Marcus, the other passengers had exposed their own values, prejudices, and assumptions. Mrs. Sterling, Marcus said, you've told me that you believe success requires abandoning idealism and that other people's suffering is an acceptable cost of business efficiency. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus continued. Mr. Richardson, you've told me that you believe wealth and power are the only meaningful measures of success, and that people who haven't achieved them have no right to question those who have. Richardson's face was reddening, but he didn't interrupt. Mr. Morrison, you've told me that you expect people you consider beneath you to be deferential and intimidated, and you're confused when they're not. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And Sarah, Marcus said, turning to her with a gentler expression, you've told me that you believe success means helping others and making a difference, even though you're surrounded by people who clearly disagree. Sarah felt exposed but not attacked. There was something in Marcus's tone that suggested approval rather than criticism. So now I have a question for all of you, Marcus said. What if everything you think you know about me is wrong? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What if, Marcus continued, the assumptions you've made about my intelligence, my education, my experience, and my resources are all based on superficial observations that have nothing to do with reality? Victoria was the first to speak. Are you saying you're not really a janitor? Marcus smiled. I'm saying that what I do for work and who I am as a person might be more complex than you've assumed. Then what do you do? Richardson demanded. I told you earlier, I clean things up.
That's not an answer, Richardson said. Isn't it? Marcus asked. What if the messes I clean up aren't the kind you can see with a mop and bucket? Sarah was staring at Marcus now, pieces of a puzzle beginning to fit together in her mind. The watch, the book, the questions, the complete lack of intimidation, the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to be conducting some kind of experiment rather than defending himself. You're not who you appear to be, she said quietly. Marcus looked at her and nodded slightly. Very good, Sarah. Then who are you? Victoria asked, and for the first time her tone was more curious than hostile. Marcus reached into his cleaning bag and pulled out a leather portfolio that none of them had noticed before. From it, he extracted a business card and handed it to Sarah. Sarah looked at the card and her eyes widened. She read it twice, then looked up at Marcus in shock. What does it say? Richardson demanded. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper as she read, Marcus Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Foundation. Dedicated to education, healthcare, and economic development initiatives worldwide. The silence in the cabin was deafening. Marcus reached into the portfolio again and pulled out a tablet. He turned it on and showed them the screen. It displayed the homepage of a website for the Chen Foundation, with Marcus's photo prominently displayed. The Chen Foundation, Marcus said quietly, has given away over $2 billion in the past 10 years. We built schools, funded medical research,
provided microloans to small businesses, and supported disaster relief efforts in 43 countries. Richardson stared at the tablet screen, his face pale. That's impossible. Why is it impossible? Marcus asked. Because Richardson struggled with the words. Because I don't look like what you think a billionaire philanthropist should look like? Victoria was staring at the business card Sarah had handed to her. This could be fake. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After a moment, someone answered. Hello, Jennifer? Yes, it's Marcus. Could you please confirm my identity for some people I'm traveling with? Marcus put the phone on speaker. A professional female voice came through clearly. This is Jennifer Walsh, Director of Communications for the Chen Foundation. I can confirm that I'm speaking with Marcus Chen, our founder and CEO. Mr. Chen is currently traveling to London for meetings with the heads of 3 major international aid organizations. Marcus ended the call and looked around the cabin at the stunned faces. The question now, he said, is what you're going to do with this information.
The silence that followed Marcus's revelation stretched across the first-class cabin like a thick fog. Richardson sat frozen, his laptop screen casting an eerie glow on his pale face. Victoria stared at the business card in her hands as if it might transform into something else if she looked at it long enough. James had removed his earbuds entirely and was leaning forward, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. Sarah was the first to break the silence. $2 billion? She whispered. Marcus nodded. Over the past 10 years, yes. Though money is just a tool, what matters is what you build with it. Richardson finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. But you're dressed like a janitor. You're carrying cleaning supplies. I am, Marcus agreed. I spent the morning volunteering at a homeless shelter downtown. We were cleaning and preparing meals for people who haven't eaten in days. Good, honest work that needed to be done. The explanation hung in the air, and Sarah realized it made perfect sense. Of course Marcus would volunteer at shelters. Of course he would do the work himself rather than just write checks. It fit everything she'd observed about him. Victoria was shaking her head slowly. This doesn't make sense. Billionaires don't dress like janitors and fly commercial. They have private jets, assistants, security details. Some do, Marcus said. I prefer to travel differently. I learn more about the world when I'm part of it rather than insulated from it. Learn what? James asked, his voice barely audible. Marcus looked at him thoughtfully. I learn how people treat each other when they think no one important is watching. I learn what people really believe about worth and dignity and respect. I learn who extends kindness to strangers and who reserves it only for people they think can benefit them. The implication hit them all like a physical blow. They had failed his test spectacularly. Richardson was struggling to process the revelation. If this is true, if you're really who you say you are, then why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us— Let you what? Marcus asked gently. Let us make fools of ourselves, Richardson finished miserably. Did I let you do anything? Or did you choose to treat me poorly based on assumptions you made about my appearance? Victoria set the business card down with trembling hands. We were horrible to you. You were honest, Marcus corrected. You showed me exactly what you believe about human worth and how you treat people you consider beneath you. That's valuable information. Sarah was beginning to understand something that the others hadn't grasped yet. This wasn't an accident, she said slowly. You choosing to dress this way, to fly commercial, to sit in first class looking like you don't belong, this was intentional. Marcus smiled at her, and she saw approval in his eyes. Very perceptive, Sarah. But why? Why put yourself through this? Why put us through this? Marcus leaned back in his seat and looked around the cabin.
Because I needed to understand something. The Chen Foundation is considering a major partnership with several companies represented by people in this cabin. Before I commit billions of dollars and affect thousands of lives, I wanted to understand the character of the people I'd be working with. The blood drained from Richardson's face. Partnership? Your company, Richardson International, has applied for a $300 million grant to develop sustainable manufacturing processes in developing countries. Mrs. Sterling's consulting firm has proposed to oversee the implementation. Mr. Morrison's company would handle logistics and distribution. The three passengers stared at Marcus in horror, realizing that their behavior over the past few hours might have cost them the opportunity of a lifetime.
That's why you're going to London, Victoria said faintly. Part of it. I have meetings with the heads of 3 international aid organizations who would be partners in this initiative. But I also wanted to meet with potential corporate partners face-to-face, without the usual filters of boardrooms and formal presentations. Richardson was holding his head in his hands. We ruined everything! Did you? Marcus asked. What exactly do you think you ruined? The partnership, the grant, our company's reputations, everything. Marcus was quiet for a moment, studying Richardson's face. Tell me, Mr. Richardson, why do you want that grant? Richardson looked up, confusion mixing with desperation. What do you mean? It's a simple question. Why does your company want $300 million to develop sustainable manufacturing in developing countries? Richardson struggled to shift from personal mortification to business pitch mode. Because it's a growing market, there's tremendous potential for expansion, for building brand loyalty in emerging economies. The profit margins on sustainable technology are improving, and being first to market would give us a significant competitive advantage. Marcus nodded, making mental notes. And the people in those developing countries? The communities where you'd be building? They'd benefit from job creation, economic development, technology transfer. It's a win-win situation. For whom? Richardson paused, sensing a trap, but not sure where it lay. For everyone involved. Mrs. Sterling, your consulting firm would oversee implementation. How would you ensure that the benefits actually reach the people they're intended to help? Victoria was still reeling from the revelation of Marcus's identity, but she tried to collect herself. We'd establish efficiency metrics, monitor resource allocation, and ensure that costs stay within projected parameters and that deliverables meet specification requirements. And if those efficiency requirements conflicted with community needs? If maximizing profit meant displacing local workers or disrupting traditional ways of life? Victoria hesitated. We'd find a balance. Would you? Earlier you told me that emotions and sentiment don't pay bills, and that sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for the greater good. Which greater good would you choose, efficiency and profit, or community welfare? Victoria realized she was trapped by her own earlier statements. That would depend on the specific situation. Marcus turned to James. Mr. Morrison, your company would handle logistics and distribution. How would you ensure that benefits reach the people who need them most, rather than just the people who can afford to pay for them? James was sweating now. We'd work with local distributors, establish supply chains that could reach rural areas, implement pricing structures that accommodate different economic levels. Even if that reduced your profit margins? Even if it meant accepting lower returns than you could get from more affluent markets? James was beginning to understand that every question was a test, and he was failing each one. Yes, of course, the mission would come first.
Marcus studied him. Would it? Earlier you told me that first class is for people who earn it, people who work hard and generate revenue. You seem to believe that worth is measured by financial success. If you encountered communities that couldn't afford your services,
Would you still consider them worthy of your effort? The questions were surgically precise, cutting through their professional facades to expose the values underneath. Marcus wasn't just testing their business competence, he was examining their souls. Sarah watched this interrogation with fascination and growing respect for Marcus. She was beginning to understand that he wasn't just a wealthy philanthropist. He was someone who had thought deeply about the responsibilities that came with resources and power. "Mr. Chen," she said quietly, "may I ask you something?" Marcus turned to her. "Of course, Sarah." "Earlier, you said that success could be defined as service and impact rather than wealth and power. But you have both wealth and power. How do you reconcile that?" It was a thoughtful question, and Marcus seemed pleased that she'd asked it. "That's the right question, Sarah. The answer is that wealth and power are tools. They're not good or evil in themselves. What matters is how you use them and why." "But surely having that much money changes you. Surely it insulates you from the reality that most people face." "It can," Marcus agreed, "which is why I make conscious choices to stay connected to that reality, like volunteering at shelters, like flying commercial, like dressing in ways that let me see how people treat those they consider unimportant." Richardson looked up from his hands. "And what have you learned?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I've learned that most people have two faces. One they show to people they want to impress, and one they show to people they think don't matter. I've learned that kindness is often conditional, based on what people think they can get from you. And I've learned that the measure of a person's character isn't how they treat their equals, but how they treat people who can do nothing for them." The words stung because they were undeniably accurate. "But I've also learned," Marcus continued, "that people can change, that confronting their own behavior can be the beginning of growth, that shame, properly channeled, can become wisdom." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "So this isn't the end of the partnership discussions?" Marcus looked around the cabin at the three business people who had spent hours dismissing and belittling him. "It depends." "On what?" James asked desperately. "On what you do with what you've learned today." Victoria leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out his tablet again and opened a different application. The screen showed a series of video thumbnails, each labeled with a timestamp from their flight. "I've been recording our conversations," he said simply. The color drained from all three faces. "Not for public release," Marcus continued quickly, seeing their panic, "but for my own evaluation. I review these recordings when I'm making decisions about partnerships. They help me understand who I'm really dealing with." Richardson's voice was barely a whisper. "What do the recordings show?"
They show exactly what happened. Your assumptions, your statements, your treatment of someone you believed was beneath you. They show Mrs. Sterling explaining that other people's suffering is an acceptable cost of business efficiency. They show you, Mr. Richardson, arguing that people who haven't achieved wealth and status have no right to question those who have. They show Mr. Morrison expressing surprise that someone would treat him as an equal rather than a subordinate. The three passengers sat in stunned silence, confronting the reality of their behavior from an outside perspective. "But," Marcus said, "they also show something else. They show the moment when each of you began to question your assumptions. Mrs. Sterling, you admitted you didn't know why people in service jobs don't typically engage in the kinds of conversations we were having. That was the beginning of self-reflection. Mr. Richardson, you listened to my questions about business ethics and tried to engage with them, even when they made you uncomfortable. That showed intellectual honesty. Mr. Morrison, you acknowledged that I wasn't behaving as you expected, and you showed curiosity about why. That demonstrated openness to new perspectives." Sarah realized that Marcus had been conducting a complex psychological evaluation,
looking for signs of growth potential even as he documented their failures. The question, Marcus said, is what you choose to do now. Do you dismiss this experience as an unfortunate misunderstanding and return to your old patterns? Or do you use it as an opportunity to examine and change how you see and treat other people? Victoria was the first to respond. I need to think about a lot of things. The way I've been approaching my work, the assumptions I've been making. I never thought of myself as someone who looked down on others, but clearly I do. It was a painful admission, but Marcus could see that it was genuine. Richardson was struggling with his own revelations. I've built my career on the idea that success justifies itself, that if you work hard and achieve results, you don't need to apologize to anyone. But listening to you, seeing how you've used your success, I'm not sure I've been thinking about it the right way. James nodded slowly. I've always thought respect was something you earned through achievement. But you've made me realize that basic human dignity shouldn't be conditional on what someone has accomplished. Marcus listened to each response carefully, evaluating their sincerity and depth of understanding. Sarah, who had been watching this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Mr. Chen, can I ask what you're going to do about the partnerships? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. That's a good question, Sarah. What do you think I should do? Sarah considered carefully. I think you should give them a chance to prove they can change, not because they deserve it, but because the people who would benefit from these projects deserve to have partners who've learned these lessons. Marcus smiled at her. Wise answer. And what conditions would you put on that chance? Sarah thought about it. I'd want to see evidence that they're really changing, not just saying what they think you want to hear. I'd want accountability measures, and I'd want the people who would be affected by these projects to have a voice in how they're designed and implemented. Excellent suggestions, Marcus said. Mr. Richardson, Mrs. Sterling, Mr. Morrison, are you willing to accept those conditions? Richardson spoke first. If you're willing to give us another chance, yes, absolutely. Victoria nodded. I need to completely rethink how I approach consulting. If you can help me do that, I'm willing to learn. James was more hesitant. I'm not sure I understand what kind of changes you'd want to see.
Marcus turned to him. Start with this. The next time you encounter someone who looks different from what you expect, or who doesn't fit your assumptions about who belongs where, ask yourself what you can learn from them instead of what's wrong with them. That's it? James asked. That's the beginning, Marcus said. Real change starts with changing how you see. The plane began its descent into London, and the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their approach to Heathrow. As passengers began preparing for landing, Marcus pulled out a business card holder and handed cards to Richardson, Victoria, and James. These cards have the contact information for Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who heads our corporate partnership evaluation program. She'll work with each of your companies over the next 6 months. If at the end of that time she determines that you've genuinely integrated these lessons into your business practices, we'll move forward with the partnerships. The 3 business people took the cards as if they were lifelines. Dr. Rodriguez will be evaluating not just your policies and procedures, but how you treat your employees, your customers, and your partners. She'll be looking at whether you prioritize efficiency over human welfare, whether you consider community impact in your decisions, and whether you've learned to see all people as worthy of respect, regardless of their appearance or status. Victoria looked at her card. And if we don't pass her evaluation? Then you'll have learned something valuable about yourselves, even if it doesn't result in a partnership with us, Marcus said. Personal growth is its own reward. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Sarah approached Marcus one more time. Mr. Chen, can I ask you one last question? Of course. Why did you tell me your real thoughts about success earlier when you didn't tell the others? Marcus considered the question. What did I tell you about success, Sarah? Sarah thought back to their conversation. You asked me what I thought it looked like, and I said helping people and making a difference. You seemed to approve of that answer. I did approve. Do you know why? Sarah shook her head. Because when someone asked you to define success, your first thought wasn't about what you could get, but about what you could give. That tells me something fundamental about your character. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. But I'm just a flight attendant, saving up for nursing school. I don't have resources to make a big difference. Marcus smiled at her. Sarah, you made a difference today. You asked thoughtful questions, you showed genuine care for everyone involved, and you suggested wise solutions when asked for your opinion. You don't need billions of dollars to have an impact. You just need to care about other people and have the courage to act on that caring. He reached into his portfolio and pulled out another business card. This is for Dr. Sarah Martinez, who runs our healthcare education initiative. We provide full scholarships to nursing school, along with mentorship and guaranteed job placement upon graduation. If you're interested, she'd like to talk with you. Sarah stared at the card in disbelief. You're offering me a scholarship?
I'm offering you an opportunity to maximize your potential for helping others. What you do with it is up to you. As passengers began disembarking, Richardson, Victoria, and James approached Marcus one final time. Mr. Chen, I know we don't deserve it, but thank you for giving us a chance to learn from our mistakes. Marcus looked at the three of them. Everyone deserves a chance to grow, but growth requires honest self-examination and genuine commitment to change. I hope you'll take this opportunity seriously. Victoria stepped forward. I want you to know that this experience has changed how I see everything. My work, my relationships, my responsibilities to other people. I won't waste this chance. James nodded in agreement. I've been thinking about what you said about how we treat people who can do nothing for us. I realize I've been failing that test for years. I want to do better. Marcus shook hands with each of them. Then I have high hopes for our future partnership. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave the plane, Sarah realized that she had witnessed something extraordinary. She had seen people confront their own prejudices and commit to genuine change. She had seen wealth and power used not for personal gratification, but for education and growth. Most importantly, she had seen that respect and dignity were not luxuries to be earned, but rights to be granted freely. Marcus was the last passenger to disembark, carrying his cleaning supplies and his small bag. As he passed Sarah at the door, he paused. Thank you for your kindness today, Sarah. Never underestimate the power of treating every person you meet as if they matter, because they do. Sarah watched him walk up the jetway, still looking like a janitor, still carrying his mop bucket. But now she knew that appearances meant nothing, and that the most important work anyone could do was the work of building a more compassionate world. As she began preparing the cabin for the next flight, Sarah thought about the nursing scholarship, about the opportunity to help heal people, about the difference one person could make simply by choosing to care. She thought about Marcus Chen, who had billions of dollars but chose to spend his mornings serving meals to homeless people, who had private jets available but flew commercial to stay connected to the world, who had every privilege imaginable but used them to lift others up. And she thought about the lesson that everyone on that flight had learned, that true success isn't measured by what you achieve for yourself, but what you make possible for others. The cleaning crew arrived to prepare the plane for its next departure, and Sarah greeted them with genuine warmth and respect, asking about their families, thanking them for their hard work. Because she had learned that every person carries invisible worth, and that the measure of our humanity is found in how we treat those who appear to have the least power. The janitor, who wasn't a janitor, had taught them all that the most important cleaning isn't done with mops and buckets. It's done with open minds, generous hearts, and the courage to see every person as deserving of dignity and respect. And that, Sarah realized as she smiled at the cleaning crew, was the most valuable lesson of all.
6 months later, Sarah Martinez, now enrolled in nursing school with full scholarship support from the Chen Foundation, received an email with video attachments. The first video showed Richardson International's new community partnership program in Ghana, where local workers were not just employed but trained as managers and given equity stakes in the operation. Richardson himself appeared in the video, working alongside Ghanaian colleagues, his sleeves rolled up, his manner respectful and collaborative. The second video featured Victoria Sterling's consulting firm's revolutionary new approach. Instead of just maximizing efficiency, they now conducted human impact assessments for every recommendation, ensuring that cost savings didn't come at the expense of worker welfare. Victoria had personally spent 2 weeks living in a community affected by one of her previous recommendations, learning firsthand the consequences of prioritizing profit over people. The third video showed James Morrison distributing supplies in rural areas of Bangladesh, having redesigned his company's logistics model to serve communities regardless of their ability to pay premium prices. He spoke passionately about the privilege of being able to help people rather than simply profit from them. Each video ended with the same message: in memory of a flight that changed everything, and in gratitude to a janitor who taught us that appearance means nothing and character means everything. At the bottom of the email was a simple signature: still cleaning up messes, still learning from everyone I meet. Marcus. Sarah smiled as she closed her laptop and headed to her clinical rotation at the Children's Hospital. She had learned that the most important transformations happen not in boardrooms or foundations, but in the quiet moments when one person chooses to see the dignity in another, and that sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, even when they're carrying mop buckets.